Hey yo, Paul here. Today we're gonna do a guide on the Aeropress. It's gonna be quite the doozy of a guide, so strap yourself in and get ready. So what is the Aeropress? In a nutshell, it's a big syringe. It has three parts: the cap, the main chamber, and also the plunger. These three parts come together to make some really delicious coffee. Now, who is the Aeropress for? Well, the first thing to know is that the Aeropress is a great brewing device for anyone who enjoys to tinker. And if you love to play around with variables and make small modifications and really push the limits of coffee, then the Aeropress is great for you. One of its big downsides is actually that it's so small. Like, you can only brew 10 ounces of coffee with the old Aeropress and 8 ounces of coffee with the new Aeropress Go. So if you're trying to brew coffee for multiple people, the Aeropress is just not for you. If you've done some research on how to brew with the Aeropress, you've probably come across the two camps of the regular and inverted methods of brewing. With the regular orientation, there will be coffee that is dripping out of the cap, even if you don't press down the plunger. With the inverted method, the Aeropress becomes a immersion brewer. And this means that all the coffee grounds are in contact with the water until you decide to press it out. Moving forwards in this guide, we will only be focusing on the inverted method. This is because I've had the most success with the inverted brewing method, and I think that you have way more control over some brewing variables with that technique. In this section, I'll be going through a full brew with the Aeropress, adding commentary where I see fit. If you're already familiar with the basic steps of brewing with the Aeropress, feel free to skip ahead. I begin with measuring out the beans. You can also hear in the background that my water is boiling, so that is ready to go whenever. Now let's grind the beans. Fresh beans are extremely important for good coffee. It's one of the things that really makes or breaks your coffee. A mini sniff. Now let's begin with the actual steps. Assemble the inverted Aeropress. Put the plunger in from the top into the chamber so that it can stand like so. Now preheat the Aeropress. And I also go to get 2 cups, one that I'll be drinking from and one that I'll be able to pour excess water into. I'm now taking a filter and placing it into the filter cap, followed by preheating it with water. This will make it so that the paper filter sticks to the cap. I usually just pour the liquid from the Aeropress into the cup that I'll be drinking from to preheat that. So we just finished step 3, which is to toss out the water from the Aeropress. Now let's do step 4, pour in grinds. Let's shake it out a bit to make it nice and level. So now I'm tinkering with my scale to reset the weight and also prepare the timer. And let's begin. I start pouring the water and stir at the same time. Since it's an immersion brewer, you don't need to worry too much about your pouring technique. Just make sure that all the beans are saturated as quickly as possible. Once you know that all the beans are saturated, pour in the remaining amount of water you'll be using for this brew. And now comes the slightly boring part of waiting. The one thing you need to do during this wait time is to toss out the water that is preheating your drinking cup. As we are closing in on the 2-minute mark, we do the next step, which is to screw on the filter cap. Now I have a habit of slowly pressing it down before actually doing the main press to remove all of the air between the filter and the coffee. Now we do the next step of flip and press. Try to avoid pressing too hard. This is easily one of the common places where accidents could happen. I like to just slightly lean my body weight on it with one hand while using the other hand to stabilize the Aeropress. Damn, that's a focused coffee making face. As you near the end, just keep on pressing until you hear a hiss. That's your sign to stop. You don't want to press too hard beyond the hiss because that's when a lot of small fines might get into your cup. Now it's time for the cleanup. Fully dry out the coffee puck by pressing the excess liquid into another cup. This makes it so that the puck is extremely easy to just plop out of the Aeropress. Like so. Now just go through a mini cleaning process of cleaning your Aeropress and then come back to your coffee. My cleaning process is pretty easy. It's not on camera right now, but it's pretty much just rinsing it with water and giving it a light scrub and then drying it out. So I've had my Aeropress for like over 5 years, and if you take care of it and make sure that everything is nice and clean after every brew, I bet it'll last for another 5 years without too much effort. So I like to reassemble the Aeropress and make it as small as possible. So I put all the components back again and press down the syringe. Like so. Now we are finally at the last step, which is to stir your coffee and enjoy it. And done. Sounds pretty easy, right? Well, it is, because I've only outlined the basic steps of brewing with the Aeropress. The thing that hasn't been explained yet is how to control extraction with the Aeropress. Here's a list of the variables that control extraction with the Aeropress. Grind size, brewing ratio, and dose need to be determined before step 4. Water temperature and agitation need to be tweaked on step 5. And brew time gets tweaked on step 6. This is a lot of variables, and I do not recommend using all of them. So here's an important concept to keep in mind. Only brew with as many variables that you want to have control over. So let's say you're going to a cottage trip and you have pre-ground beans. Well, remove the grind size as a variable. I also don't want to bring my thermometer, so let's remove the water temperature as a variable. So if you can just remove variables and control just one variable, what is really the benefit of having control over more variables? The biggest benefit of controlling more variables in your brewing recipe is that you can start pushing specific variables to the extreme. What if you want to grind extremely fine? What do you need to do with your Aeropress variables to then compensate for that? Well, if you just have grind size as a variable, you grind super fine and it becomes over extracted, you have nowhere else to go. There's nothing else you can do. But with these other variables in your control, you can now compensate the over extractedness of super fine coffee with cooler water. You can add a lower brewing ratio. You can increase the dose. You can have a shorter brew time. All of these things would then compensate for the finer grind size to then make a balanced cup. Whoa, didn't see you there. Hey, how's it going? Check out my Patreon. Patreon is a great way to support the content creators you love on a monthly basis. As a Patreon, you also get some unique perks like coffee chats, downloadable brewing charts, live streams, and more. Recently I posted about growing mushrooms and home roasting with a bread maker and heat gun. Both of these topics will eventually become videos on this very channel. Join us at www.patreon.com/brewinghabits. In this next section, I'll be talking about recipes and different ways you can brew with an Aeropress. And I'm putting the word recipe in air quotes because in most recipes you'll get specific numbers. Grind at this setting, grind this much, brew for this long. Instead, I'll be showing you the essence of a brewing recipe. I like comparing the Aeropress to a board game. The Aeropress is a game of balance, where you win when you've brewed a balanced and delicious cup of coffee. You do this by changing the variables that control extraction, followed by tasting your cup of coffee, checking for its level of extraction, and how delicious the cup of coffee is. This is how the game board looks like. Above the line, you have all the variables that control extraction with your Aeropress. This is how they work. By moving a variable to the left, you are decreasing extraction, and by moving a variable to the right, you are increasing extraction. Some variables have more impact on extraction than others. Moving variables in opposite directions can negate each other. By moving the variables around, you might achieve a balanced extraction, but also have a boring cup of coffee. Remember that victory can only be achieved when you have a balanced and delicious cup of coffee. And to determine if it is balanced and delicious, you need to taste your coffee. And here's the fun part. There are dozens of ways to achieve victory. And this is where understanding the essence of a brewing recipe comes into play, because it gives you more direction in how you want to achieve a good cup of coffee. Here are 7 different recipe profiles you can strive towards and aim for when brewing with the Aeropress. I'll highlight the variables I think are important to change. Recipe profile number 1, minimize brew time. You can get it down to around a minute from when the water touches the grinds to when all the liquid is pressed out of the Aeropress. Recipe profile number 2, optimize for dark roasts. Dark roasts are easy to over-extract, so use cooler water and coarser grinds to compensate for that. Recipe profile number 3, optimize for light roasts. Light roasts are more dense and harder to extract, so use finer grinds and close to boiling water to compensate for that. Recipe profile number 4, optimize for a good mouthfeel. There are some single origin beans like a Kenyan where you can emphasize the mouthfeel over specific tastes. And to achieve this, use a lower brewing ratio like a 1:14 to 1:16. Recipe profile number 5, optimize for the nuances. Going back to single origin beans, a Ethiopian bean really loves its light floral and delicate tasting notes. To achieve this, we need to brew with a pretty high brewing ratio, like a 1:17 to 1:19, to get that tea-like texture and consistency. Recipe profile number 6, something as close to espresso as possible. This is where we push the brewing ratio to its lowest limits. An espresso is usually brewed with a 1:2 ratio. However, with the Aeropress, the lowest you can go is around a 1:5 to a 1:7 brewing ratio. It won't be the espresso you experience at a cafe, but it'll be the closest thing you can make with an Aeropress. Recipe profile number 7, as much volume as possible. This is the only brewing recipe that really shines with the regular brewing method instead of the inverted brewing method. This is because you allow liquid to go out of the Aeropress, making more room for new liquid. And that really allows you to push the volume to its maximum amount. You can get around 50% more volume by using this technique. Now that we know how to play the game and brew a good cup of coffee with the Aeropress, let's talk about the variables that make my game different from your game, which is also the reason why I'm not giving you specific numbers in these recipe profiles. In a perfect world, we should all be able to brew a delicious cup of coffee from the same brewing recipe. What makes this a challenge is that all of us are using different equipment and resources to brew our cup of coffee. The three main factors that always change up the game we play and prevent us from getting a perfect recipe are coffee beans, grinder, and water. Coffee beans are unique with their own origins, roast levels, and roast dates. Grinders will produce a different grind consistency depending on what grinder you have and how old your grinder is. Water has a different mineral composition and can easily make or break a cup of coffee. An extremely important concept here is that these three variables are three big reasons why you just can't copy my brewing recipe. Your extraction will be different from my extraction, and we'll just have two very different cups of coffee. I've linked to a couple of videos I've created in the past that teaches you this concept of dialing in coffee, of tasting extraction, the basics of extraction, and also the dialing in process. Those links can be found below. Once you buy an Aeropress, is that it? Well, there's a lot of cool attachments that you could be adding to your Aeropress. The Puck Puck Dripper allows you to make cold brew with your Aeropress. The Prismo attachment allows you to have a no-leak seal and creates a bit more pressure when you press down. You can also change the filter type to create a whole different cup. You can use the Coffee Sock fabric filter, you could use the Able metal filter, or you could use the Acer thicker paper filter. And that's pretty much it. I know it's a lot of information to go through, and it's a lot of concepts to understand, but I'm confident that if you go through this video and understand it all, you will be amazing at brewing with the Aeropress. A quick shout out to Aeropressers on Facebook and the subreddit Aeropress on Reddit, because those have been a great resource for me throughout my days, and I would recommend you checking them out too if you want to learn more about the Aeropress. If you have any questions about the Aeropress, feel free to ask those below, and until next time, peace.